A recent trend in tech has been bringing multiple screens to smartphones. You have the Galaxy Fold, which unfolds into basically one large screen and then folds back up into one smaller screen. You have the LG G8X Thin Q, which is literally just like two phones hinged together. We most recently saw Motorola's new Razr phone, which actually folds into like a flip phone, and that's pretty cool. But I'd say none of these phones are too practical to use in daily life, at least not yet. So what haven't we tried yet? I don't know, what about instead of a hinge, you just slapped a screen on the back of the phone? Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and this is the $550 Nubia Z20. It's a pretty good phone on its own, but, you know, flip it around, and, well, it's a second phone. Or actually the same phone, just smaller. The back is an ideal location for a display, right? Roll the intro. So if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, why are there two screens again? Well, there's basically one reason I can think of beyond being a marketing gimmick. The selfie camera. Why have a downgraded selfie camera on the front while thickening the bezel when you could use the rear 48 megapixel main sensor instead? 48 megapixels, that's a crazy number, and I have to say this is probably the best selfie camera I've ever used, in all honesty. But I'll get to that because there's a lot more to this phone than just the second display. If you've been paying attention to my videos, you know that I reviewed another phone of Nubia's that they sent me, the Red Magic 3. It's a really cool phone with top-of-the-line specs, but it was too gamery for me. But Nubia said, hey, want to try out the Z20? It has two screens, and so I said, yeah, sure, why not? There'll be a link to this phone in the description, not sponsored, but if you want to check it out, it's down there. We're looking at a Snapdragon 855 Plus processor in here, which is top of the line, 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of internal storage, a 4000 milliamp hour battery, 3 cameras on the back, an OLED display, albeit only 1080p. This phone, according to the spec sheet, should be in direct competition with like OnePlus, but it's only $550, which is $50 cheaper than the OnePlus 7T, which I guess kind of does make it in direct competition with OnePlus. Oh, and there's a second screen because why not? Let's start with the general design. Honestly, I think it looks really good. The glossy black finish is something I find really appealing. Plus you have the always-on display there, which, I mean, it looks really cool. Those 3 cameras there, we'll get to that. But first, the front of the phone, we have a 6.42-inch display that is nearly bezel-less and slightly curved over the corners. This is a pretty gorgeous front. The top bezel is extremely minimal, thanks to there being no selfie camera needed. There's no denying that this isn't a great phone in terms of being near bezel-less. The display itself is only 1080p, but it looks pretty good to my eye, with colors popping, blacks being black, and everything appearing crispy. It also gets decently bright, so no complaints about the screen. We actually have 2 fingerprint sensors on both sides of the phone, which is unusual. But the benefit is, when you have it flipped upside down and want to wake up the second display, it'll automatically know you're unlocking it and will use the other fingerprint sensor to do it. This is a neat system, and I wish more Android manufacturers would stick the fingerprint sensor in the power button. I've always felt like that's the most convenient location besides under the screen or maybe under the display like we've seen recently. These fingerprint sensors are surprisingly good. That was one of the shortcomings I mentioned with the Red Magic 3, so it's nice to see that this phone seems to be more reliable that way. They're pretty darn fast, and they're usually pretty good at figuring out that it's my thumb touching it. Another one of my big complaints with the Red Magic was the haptics, which were horrible. And when I say haptics, I mean vibrations basically, and while the Z20 isn't good, it does feel much better. Perhaps it's the way the phone is made, but it's much more pleasant feeling and doesn't make me never want to use the phone like they did on the Red Magic. They aren't necessarily pleasant, and I did end up turning them off for the keyboard, but they are much better than the Red Magic was. The speaker is about as good as you'd expect, and that is to say, not great. These Chinese phones that sell for crazy cheap need to cut corners somewhere, and the speaker is an easy place to do that. It uses only that sole speaker there on the bottom, and well, it doesn't sound good. Odds are you'll be using headphones anyways, and while this phone doesn't come with headphones, it does come with a USB-C to headphone dongle in the box. You can see it here, and considering how many phones don't even come with dongles at all anymore, it's something. The phone also comes with this plastic case and a screen protector pre-installed, which is kind of nice, especially because these more obscure Android phones often don't have a lot of cases or screen protectors made for them, so when they come in the box, it just makes it that much easier for you. You don't have to go out and try to find one online, and that's the general gist of what you get with this phone, you know, straight up. It feels pretty darn premium in the hand, and I really quite like it. It really does feel like a 2019 smartphone, which can't be said for a lot of budget type Androids out there. The fact that this phone costs only $550 is absolutely insane. And just this phone as is would be probably worth $550. It's a pretty good deal for top of the line specs. But nope, with the Z20 you get a second screen too, because why not? You have this button on the home screen that lets you flip the screen around. It's a cool party trick, but practically speaking there's not much I'd want to do here. The quality of the display is definitely not as good, not that it really matters, as it's mostly meant to be a viewfinder for selfies. And when I say not as good, I actually mean 720p, which is still really not that bad. Also, there is a really weird thing I want to point out about this phone. For whatever reason, the coloring on the back is way warmer than on the front. It's kind of hard to describe, but you can actually see it here when I close out of the camera app and go to the home screen. It's pretty blue for a second and then it turns more yellow, which means the phone is intentionally making it warmer. I don't know why it's doing this, and I couldn't seem to figure out a way to turn that off in settings, but yeah, I thought I'd just point that out because it's kind of weird. And so those cameras, we have a triple lens setup, just like the best from Apple and Samsung right now, a 48 megapixel main rear sensor, which is a ridiculous number by the way, an 8 megapixel telephoto 3x zoom camera, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide camera. How's the quality of pictures? Well, pretty good honestly. You can get some nice shots, and while despite the high number of megapixels it's definitely not iPhone 11 Pro level, it can still do a good job and produce some crispy images. The ultra wide is really nice to have here too, and it looks pretty slick. Here's some photos compared to the iPhone 11 Pro just for perspective. For a phone that is literally half the price of the iPhone, this is not bad at all. Although you could go up to $700 from $550 to the iPhone 11, and then you do get the better cameras, which might be more reasonable depending on your use case. But I mean, if you're looking at an Android phone in the first place like this, you're probably not really considering an iPhone. It's just an easy comparison because it's not that much more money. I'd say these cameras are probably pretty on par with the OnePlus, maybe not quite as good, but still pretty decent. The telephoto lens I was a bit disappointed in though. The 3x optical zoom is cool, but it really can't take the nicest photos, and I would mostly want to stick with the main and ultra wide cameras if I was taking pictures with this thing. For video, this phone is actually ridiculous, being able to take up to 8K at 15 frames per second. It doesn't look good and is still in beta, but it's cool that phones are being pushed so far. We also have 4K at 60 if you'd like, but the gimmick of this phone is that you can either use the 48 megapixel main sensor or 16 megapixel ultra wide for your selfies. You can't use the telephoto, so sadly you can't have any close-ups of all your nose hairs, but generally speaking, wow, this is a great selfie. The background isn't blown out at all, and you can see like every little detail of my face, which probably isn't a good thing. And what's crazy is we can take this with the wide angle as well. Now this will distort things of course and lower the quality a bit, but it's still really cool. The HDR is really good, and if you somehow have friends and want to take a selfie with them, this phone would be the phone to do it with. I think this is probably the best selfie camera system I've ever used. Not that that's really saying much, but yeah, if you're really into selfies, this might just be the phone for you. Another thing worth mentioning is that by default HDR is off, and that's something you'll definitely want to turn on, or at least to auto, otherwise you'll go from a photo like this to a photo like this. Also, the pretty filter is on by default, and you're going to want to dial that back to 0 or you're going to look pretty strange. The selfies this phone can produce are probably some of the best out there right now. It's actually maybe too detailed because you'll be able to see every single little imperfection in your face. Is this phone worth buying simply for selfies? For me, absolutely not, but if you're someone who's really into that, then maybe. But the thing is that this phone is really impressive even without the selfies. Top of the line specs for $550. The Snapdragon 855 Plus chip and 8GB of RAM makes for a very fast experience. The software is Android 9, and hopefully we will see an update at some point, but in the very least, it is pretty darn bare bones Android. This is about as close to stock as you see. There's like no bloat, and that's really nice, especially from a cheaper phone. There are a couple little UI issues that bug me. For example, the corners cut a little too close there to the time, so they should have just pushed it in a little bit. Not sure what that's all about. Same thing on the Red Magic, I feel like that's gotta be an easy fix, right? But, you know, there's little things like that, but overall, the quality is actually pretty good. What you're getting here is a budget smartphone, but without the budget part. This is almost flagship level in terms of quality. It's really good for the price, but is it worth buying? It's tough to argue with $550. That's an amazing price point, and if you're someone who feels they're pretty fluent with tech and just wants a stacked phone, I'd say this is a good choice. However, for $50 more, you could go up to the OnePlus 7T, a more mainstream phone with a better 90Hz screen. Of course, only one screen, but still better. The thing about this Nubia is that it isn't a bad deal. $550 is kind of fair for what it's giving, but it just isn't as good as the OnePlus 7T. The selfie camera gimmick isn't going to be that important to a lot of people, and yeah, it's a really cool party trick, but beyond that, most people would rather have the mainstream support and better display of the OnePlus 7T. I'd say overall, I can't recommend buying this phone if you can buy a OnePlus instead. Not that this phone is a bad deal, and if you want that back display, it's a really good pickup. But I do think the OnePlus at the moment is just the better buy for only $50 more. I do have to say quickly though, how much would this phone cost without the dual screen? If you just, you know, slapped a basic selfie camera on the front and called it a day. If you could get this phone down to say around $450, I honestly think we could have another Poco phone type situation where a ton of big YouTubers just recommend the crap out of, you know, some random budget phone that normally wouldn't see the light of day, simply because the price is so good for the specs. $550 is still a great deal, don't get me wrong, and the gimmick is a gimmick, but it's still pretty cool. But for not that much more money, you can get a more mainstream phone like a OnePlus, or even an iPhone 11, and the brand of a phone is important to a lot of people. Nubia, if you're watching this, next year what I would do is release a phone with all the specs, but none of the gimmicks. If it could be priced at around $450 or even $399 would be ideal. I think it would sell ridiculously well, and I think you'd have a lot of YouTubers like MKBHD and, you know, those kinds of guys really picking it up and recommending it to people. That being said, as is, the Nubia Z20 is absolutely worth $550. It's a very, very good price. Should you buy it? That's up to you, obviously. Overall, I'd say, you know, I personally would probably go for a OnePlus over this. A little bit more money, but, you know, you get a OnePlus. It's hard to argue with that. But I would not blame you at all for being at least slightly tempted by this phone. It's cool, the dual screen is pretty neat, and overall, I'm a really big fan of the hardware. Nubia did a good job with this. But with that, I think I'm pretty much done here. Big thanks to Nubia for sending this out to me. Again, if you're interested, link in the description. Not sponsored, but hey, if you want to check it out, it'll be there. If you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason. With that all being said, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.